Kindt, who is professor of business administration at the University of Illinois. And he is going to discuss with us the gambling problem that will come to be if a casino moves into what used to be the Bristol Mall. Now, we hope some of you have a backbone, some of you weak-kneed denominational preachers out there will step up to the plate and help fight this battle. Bill Haywood is with us, and Bill is fighting the battle immensely, and we certainly do appreciate that. Rise to Truth, you on the air. Go ahead, please.
That's John Kindt at the University of Illinois.
John, thank you much, buddy, for calling and helping us fight a battle in Bristol, Virginia that certainly needs to be fought. Now, if you don't care for a little bit, give us a little background about John Kindt in case someone has not heard of who you are.
Well, I went to school at William & Mary and UVA Law School, grew up in Waynesboro, Virginia, taught at the University of Illinois for approximately 40 years, and my colleagues and I at the University of Illinois, and I will just say Illinois being one of the most corrupt states in the Union, have been dealing with the gambling issue for 30 years and more, and have done a lot of research on the issue. So my colleagues and I are, in my office, are leading edge on gambling economics, the social impacts of gambling, and we've testified repeatedly before the U.S. Congress and most state legislatures across the country.
Okay.
Not including Virginia. Virginia seems to be hiding their head in the sand, and they're not doing their homework.
Yeah. Well, John, do you have your radio on as well?
Actually, I am so far away that I don't think I'd pick up your signal.
Okay. All right. Of course, we come across on the internet. I didn't know where you had to. We were getting a little feedback there. Now, we have 5 men with us, and they'll be asking questions at different times. But if you want to give us a little background about what casinos have done for various cities or whatever in destroying them, feel free to do that.
Well, you actually have asked the salient question, and that is Illinois is one of the first states to get the casinos back in 1990. And now about 28 states have been dominated by the casino lobby. But Illinois, for example, a couple of years ago, did not have a state budget for almost over 2 years, 2 to 2.5 years. And one reason they're bankrupt is because, and this is in sworn testimony before Congress during the last 4 years, Illinois has given away $35 billion to $120 billion, siphoned it away to the gambling lobbyists and the gambling industry. And let me give you an example. The first 10 casinos that came to Illinois, their licenses were worth $500 million each on Wall Street. That's about $1 billion in today's money. And they were given away to political insiders for $25,000 apiece. So that was in today's money, about a $12 billion giveaway of money to the gambling interests. And it's continued since then. Illinois now has more slot machines than any other state in the union. And those slot machines, and casinos are 90% slot machines, are known as the crack cocaine of creating new addicted gamblers. Now, I know this sounds dramatic, but if you go online, you can check with 60 Minutes investigative reporters, go to YouTube or Google, and go to slot machines, the big gamble, and you'll see about a 12-minute report on what slot machines do, and they, in fact, light up the same areas of the brain as drugs. And so the medical community has widely characterized slot machines and electronic gambling as the crack cocaine of creating new addicted gamblers.
Okay. And, of course, then they have to set up rehab centers to try to get these people off of their gambling habit, do they not? And this is going to cost the state or city money
Oh,
because.
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. We testified back in the 1990s before state legislatures and elsewhere, Congress, under oath, and we said, look, the costs of this to the taxpayer are at least $3 for every $1 in benefits. And with tribal casinos, you're not getting any tax revenues or very little tax revenues. And so across the board today, it's gotten even worse. So the cost to the taxpayers are $5, $6, $12 for every $1 in benefits. Now, the legislature is only going to tell you about the benefits. They're not going to focus on all the social costs, what we call the ABCs of gambling. New addicted gamblers, new bankruptcies of 18 to 42% as people lose their money, and new crime, increasing 10% per year every year as people lose their money and resort to primarily property crimes, but even violent crimes. And so you see spousal abuse go up, child abuse go up, suicides go up. All of these social impacts occur, but the gambling interests don't care. Their position is we create the problems, and you and the ethical and social justice and religious communities need to just clean it up. That's not our problem. And so it's really lose-lose for everybody. And I would hate to see my home state of Virginia go down this road and do what so many other states have started to do. And I would point out there is a huge public backlash. Virginia back in the 1990s with the 700 Club, Pat Robertson's group, others, both liberal and conservative groups, helped form the National Gambling Impact Study Commission, which was sponsored by a congressman from Virginia, Congressman Frank Wolf from the 8th District, plus liberal Senator Paul Simon from the state of Illinois, and Richard Lugar, a conservative senator from the state of Indiana. And that commission said, don't do everything that the state of Virginia is now considering doing, including putting these video gambling machines at Colonial Downs and other racetracks, which are never going to make any money. It's all about slot machines.
Okay, let me ask you this. I want to be the devil's advocate for a moment. Wouldn't it be better, John, to have the Bristol Mall turned into a casino by good people, quotation marks, rather than have the mafia come in here and promote gambling in some sense?
Well, I wouldn't talk about the criminal elements, but let me just say that back in 1995, when the U.S. National Gambling Impact Study Commission was being formed, I was at the congressional hearing, which had the Virginia congressional delegation was there in big time, as well as the Illinois congressional delegation. And walking into that room, the Judiciary Committee, was a member of organized crime in the Witness Protection Program. They turned off all the cameras. They put up protective screens. And he basically said, thanks for bringing casinos to Illinois. It's like we'd all died and gone to heaven. So it does attract according to these congressional hearings, it does attract a criminal element. And in Illinois, our first 10 casinos, as I indicated, went for $25,000 apiece, a total giveaway of billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars. And one person who received political insider became a prison insider. So the corruption is there. There are all kinds of things. Just go to the movies. If you watch the movies, you'll see what gambling brings. And the FBI Office of Public Affairs over the years has said concurs. He says that they say that casinos, type gambling, video gambling machines attract the wrong types of elements. And it's just something for people to be concerned about. But I do want to raise another major point, and that is with the educational community. I've been an elected faculty member to what we call the Faculty Senate at the University of Illinois for about 40 years. Serve on our State University Retirement System Advisory, Members Advisory Committee, elected to that as well. And my colleagues and I have followed the impacts of gambling monies on education. And teachers and teachers' pensions, education in general, people who are just sending their kids to the schools need to realize that the education monies are going to go down. Education pensions are going to be under attack. Public pensions across the board are going to be under attack as money is siphoned into the gambling interests. And the gambling interests, as you probably know, which is one reason you've got me on this program, are so powerful and there's so much money involved that they can make off of this as they do these video gambling machines, that they dominate the discussion. I'll give you a good example from Virginia. Back in 2006, Virginia was the first state to allow daily fantasy sports. My colleagues and I weren't even invited as Virginians to come to Virginia and testify before the state legislature. They only heard these bogus arguments, and I'll just call them bogus, by people and lobbyists pursuing daily fantasy sports. And Virginia became the first state to authorize, so-called regulate daily fantasy sports. So the mother of presidents became the godfather of gambling. And other states then pointed to Virginia and said, well, if Virginia can do it, we can do it. And the U.S. Justice Department just last Monday, not yesterday, but previous Monday, issued a issued a report indicating that they were now going to enforce Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy's Wire Act, which was designed to fight organized crime, against these types of gambling facilities. And they had basically 90 days to shut down. So states have basically, now it's less than 90 days, to look at these, and these daily fantasy sports proposals are in real trouble, and the U.S. Justice Department is pursuing them. So, and I did an op-ed to the Richmond Times-Dispatch back on May 4th of 2016 when Virginia was considering these daily fantasy sports and say you shouldn't do this. But the legislature in Richmond really has got its head in the sand on this, and they're not doing their homework. They're going with the lobbyists, and I haven't heard, my colleagues haven't heard many voices in opposition at this point. But people need to really wake up and be educated on what's coming their way, and it's really lose-lose for the people of Virginia. I hate to see my home state do what Illinois has done.
Well, we appreciate your help, John. This is Bill. You know, you made mention of education. One of the great concerns right now is Bristol is in some very serious financial trouble because of bad management. At least a decade or more of bad management. They're in deep financial trouble. And so the big answer for everyone is let's bring in the casinos. And they want to point to Biloxi and Gulfport and say, we can be exactly the same as they are. However, they don't want to look at other scenarios. When you bring up some place like Tunica, Mississippi or something like that, there's no comparison between us and Tunica. In reality, what do we know historically and statistically? What do we know about how casinos will help a local municipality?
Well, actually, the casinos, they're not producing anything except new addictions, new bankruptcies, and new crime. And so they're actually hurting, and they're taking money away from other businesses. And that's one of the ways that we at the University of Illinois first got involved in this, is we were asked by the governor to take a look at these casinos, see what they're doing, look at these proposals. And for the first 15 minutes, my professor colleagues and I looked around. We said, hey, this looks pretty good. And then you start reading behind the scenes what is actually going to happen, and it's just a huge transfer of money away from businesses into the gambling establishments. And so basically what you're doing is you're draining the consumer economy. You're losing sales tax revenues and other revenues from the consumer economy. Every slot machine, for example, takes in $100,000 minimum per year. Now, that's $100,000 that's coming out of cars, refrigerators, education, health care, other necessaries of life that people would spend the money on. And that results in a lost job out of the consumer economy. And slot machines don't replace that lost job. You just dust them off and collect the money. Now, you will create a few jobs at the casino, but it's nothing compared to the one job per year that you lose per slot machine every year.
Well,
so you're actually losing 3 or 4 or 5 jobs from the regional economy for every one job that you might create at the gambling facility.
let me ask you a question about Illinois' experience, because one of the sales pitches here is it's going to be outsiders coming in to do the gambling. It's not going to be the people of Bristol and Southwest Virginia doing the gambling. We're bringing in new tourists, and they're going to be spending their dollars. What's your experience?
Great point. When back in the 1990s, casinos were proposed for Richmond and for the Eastern Shore area of Virginia. And I remember speaking before the hospitality groups, the tourism groups, and others, and Colonial Williamsburg got it, Busch Gardens got it. They said, this is just going to take money away from our tourists, our pre-existing tourists. They're just going to be siphoned away into these gambling establishments. And who's going to come to Bristol? And I drive through Bristol all the time when I visit my relatives in Virginia. And, it's a terrific area, the Mountain Valley. And, where are they going to come from? Are people going to fly in from Las Vegas to Bristol, Virginia? Are people going to fly in from Atlantic City to Bristol, Virginia? I think that's just a total sham on the people of Southwest Virginia. And if Busch Gardens got it years ago, if the Tourist Association of Virginia got it years ago, they opposed the casinos back in the 1990s coming to Richmond and elsewhere in Virginia. And most of the congressional delegation, including the U.S. senators of Virginia back at that time, were opposing casinos. And you saw that when the tribes tried to get authorized, simply, and I hate to sound so negative about this, but people need to know what's going on, and that there's a counter to all of this PR that's being promulgated by the lobbyists, who are obviously just speaking who are giving the spin of the casinos. But the tribes wanted casinos, but before the congressional delegation of Virginia would allow them to be authorized, even as tribes, they had to agree, most of them had to agree in advance, never to ask for gambling. And that was part of the tribal authorizations that occurred in Virginia over the last 20, 25 years. But obviously, one of these tribes is now moving forward with a casino proposal, and probably is able to do so from some nuance of their recognition factor when they were recognized. So, but is that good for the tribes? Well, if you read Time Magazine, they did an expose about, actually it's about 15 years ago now, a cover story showing how the tribes were not really benefiting from all this, and that it was really the tribal leadership was, but not the tribal members in most instances, and that it was really a boondoggle on the community. So if you go online on YouTube and other things these days, you'll actually find some pretty good news stories about how the system's being manipulated. It's all about the buck.
It's all about
all
the
about
buck.
the gambling buck, and nobody, right, the legislature and the people who are pushing this don't care about the public. They don't care about the addictions, the bankruptcies, the crime, and the rating on the education funds. It's all money to them. Money is money.
In Virginia, Governor Northam set aside some money to study this issue, and it seems like there's a lot of people who are not necessarily opposed to the casinos who want the study first before any legislation is written, because several of them have been quoted as saying this is a very complicated issue, and of course it's hard to get the toothpaste back into the tube once you let it out. And but the general feeling is no, we don't have time for a study. They passed some, or they got a bill out of committee the other day that includes the study that will run simultaneously with the authorization of casinos. I just wonder what your thoughts are on the governor asking for a study and the folks being so opposed to that.
Oh, it should definitely be a study, but you got to make sure that it's not dominated by the gambling interests. And any bona fide study, any good faith study, is going to corroborate the negatives as well as the positives. And in any good faith study, we've done these for over 30 years. The costs are simply going to overwhelm the benefits. So I'm not afraid of or concerned about any good faith study. And the reason they're fast tracking this is because they don't want the public to know what the facts are. They don't want the public to know what the statistics are. This is a common tactic in state after state, jurisdiction after jurisdiction. And I know I'm sounding quite negative, but people need to be alerted to what is actually going on here. This is a fast track. They're moving this so that they get what they want before people realize the consequences of what they're promoting. I'll give you another example. Back in the 1990s, when they were proposing the casino for Richmond and elsewhere, the gambling interests actually hired every lobbying firm in Richmond, with the exception of two who were social-oriented, and both liberals and conservatives formed a bipartisan opposition. But the gambling interests literally put on retainer every lobbying firm in Richmond, with the exception of two, so that they would have no opposition. And I think that's what happened with the daily fantasy sports. There was no opposition. There was no counter-argument to the daily fantasy sports back in 2016, which made Virginia the first state to bite on this, when actually daily fantasy sports was being prosecuted in about a dozen states by the state attorney generals, because daily fantasy sports in their states and in others was violating state laws. But Virginia didn't do their homework, and they went ahead and authorized daily fantasy sports. So I think you raise a very good point, and that is that a good study, bona fide study, needs to be done by reputable academics. And if it occurs, the gambling interests know what it's going to result in. If it's a good faith study, it's going to show that the costs overwhelm the benefits, and that's why they don't want it, and they want to fast track the authorization, and they also want to have they want to put this on a vote, because they know they can put in on average $10 to $20 million on a vote. And I don't know. Do you know any counter group that's got $10 to $20 million to get their message out?
No, matter of fact, I brought this up with State Senator Bill Carrico the other day. They're talking about having a referendum in the localities. Bristol, Virginia has about 7,000 people, and there are two, I started to say billionaires, I believe they are, two very wealthy men involved in that. It's like having two whales in a bathtub. We don't, to be able to fight against that, in a city of about 7,000 people, it's going to be a very difficult thing. Let me mention one other thing. I want your thoughts on this. I live in Abingdon, Virginia, which is about 7 miles from the Bristol city limits. I have no vote, and they say it's not your concern. But in reality, how far do the tentacles of the consequences of a casino, how far do they reach?
Well, they're just saying they're going to bring in tourists. Well, that would include Abington, right? Mm-hmm. Aren't you a tourist from Abington? So, but really, the casinos talk about a 35-mile radius. They talk about a 50-mile feeder market, and they talk about a 100-mile feeder market. So within those concentric circles around the gambling interest, that's where you're going to see the social consequences, the bankruptcies. You're going to see the crime going up 10% per year every year as people lose their money. And this is not just me saying this. I mean, this is a definitive 10-year study published by Harvard and MIT. I mean, the academics on this is overwhelming. And you won't, in congressional testimony, under oath, you'll find the statements, no reputable economist says that gambling is good on the strategic level for a region or the country. It's just not. This is economics 101. The gambling interests want to siphon money away, and primarily through electronic gambling. And the electronic gambling is known as the crack cocaine of creating new addicted gamblers. Don't believe me? Go online and watch 60 Minutes, slot machines, the big gamble. And you'll see under slot machines, the big gamble, in just a 10, 12-minute news investigative story, how slot machines light up the same areas of the brain as drug addiction.
And John, speed makes a difference, does it not? How fast one can gamble and lose his money?
Absolutely. And that is why we're now seeing a push by the gambling industry to put 24/7 gambling, real-time gambling, on every cell phone and on every kid's video game, because they want it in your face 24 hours a day. They say it's just harmless fun for kids. But if you're concerned about your kids, 12 grandkids, you're concerned about the next generation, that is who they're after. This is a vulnerable generation, an electronic generation. I was at congressional hearings in September, actually sponsored by Bob Goodlatte, chair of the Judiciary Committee, and also out of the 6th District out of Roanoke, Virginia. And that entire committee at the time, was very concerned about this. And the chair of the subcommittee, James Sensenbrenner, out of Wisconsin, was talking about how you can't regulate this, you can't control it, even though the gambling interests say just the opposite. They say it's harmless fun, we can control it, we're not going to hurt any kids, we're going to have widespread sports gambling. That is not the business plan. The business plan is real-time gambling on every kid's cell phone, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and on video games. You can imagine what this is going to do. And while I'm not a minister, or anything, I heard a bishop at a conference saying the statistics, citing to the academic statistics, said we're going to lose 10% of our young people to the idols of gambling. And he basically said this is a tithe of the youth of America to the idols of gambling. I thought that was a very impactful statement. That's the kind of thing that sticks with you. But the gambling industry knows, they got old saying, click your mouse, lose your house. Yeah. Now it's going to be click your phone, lose your home. So it's not fun and games. People need to realize this can be virulent, and it's a derogatory social policy, and it's very harmful across the board. The only people who are going to benefit are the owners of the gambling and the politicians that they can tie into the system legally. It's all legal, but they're the ones who benefit. But actually, the government loses money on the deal, as in Illinois and other states, and local governments lose on it as well.
John, about 100 years ago, didn't America see the ills of gambling and outlaw it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Good point. This came out in congressional hearings back in the 1990s. The Teddy Roosevelt generation, the social progressives, bipartisan, the ones who came up with the right to vote for women. We had widespread gambling in this country with the Wild West after the American Civil War, and within a few decades, it was criminalized across the board. And it wasn't just criminalized in state statutes and local ordinances. It was criminalized in state constitutional provisions. And that's the way it stayed until 1960, when the first lottery was authorized. And what the gambling industry argued is, we're going to save education, we're going to do all these good things, but please vote to reverse that constitutional safeguard that's in your Constitution. And so they've used the lottery and the education arguments to reverse this safeguard, which didn't just authorize the lottery and allowed for all these casinos, video gambling machines at horse tracks and racetracks elsewhere. And look back to the U.S. National Gambling Impact Study Commission, passed in the 1990s with virtually the entire support of the Virginia congressional delegation on both sides of the aisle. 90% of the Congress voted for it. And it said, do not put slot machines at racetracks, which they called racinos. It said, do not put convenience gambling, that is slot machines where they're readily available to the public. And there were gambling people on this commission. There were people from Nevada on this commission, and they agreed. And they called for a moratorium on the expansion of any type of gambling anywhere in the United States. Well, the gambling lobbyists simply ignored it. They went state by state, operating on the naivete, just say that, naivete of state legislatures who were too busy to really look at this in depth. And it really needs to be looked at in depth. And our academics at the University of Illinois have been looking at this for 30 years, simply because the governor got us started on it and said, is this going to work or not? We did a study that you're now proposing in Virginia. We did several studies and said it's not going to work, but the Illinois legislature went ahead and did it anyway, and the people of Illinois have been suffering ever since, as far as taxes are concerned and social problems. And as I indicated earlier, our state didn't even have a budget for over 2 years, a state budget. The state's bankrupt. We're spending next year's budget on this year's money, this year's expenses, because the state of Illinois is bankrupt. And other states are as well. So, and a large part of that.
Let me ask you this, John. In Canada, did they not put slot machines at the racetracks? If so, do you know how that's turned out?
Well, you have the same types of social impacts and consequences. In the difference between Canada and the United States is that 80% of money, more or less, goes to the government. And in the United States...
Hello? Hello? All right, I think we've lost him. And, Bill, you might want to go out and call him and tell him we've lost him and see if he'll call us back.
You better hang up then.
Yeah, let me hang up so that we can do that. And we're sorry we lost him. He's given us some great information. And we got some good questions we want to ask him, such as, how can the average citizen go about opposing gambling and the casino? All right, here's the phone call. It may be him. Rise to Truth. You on the air? Go ahead, please.
This is John Kindt. I'm back.
Okay, I'm sorry, John. Somehow we lost you.
Yeah, I guess somebody didn't like what I was saying.
Well, we like what you're saying.
Amen.
Yeah.
Don't confuse me with the facts.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what a lot of these politicians don't want to be confused with is the facts. Now, John, how can the average citizen go about opposing what they're trying to do in Bristol, Virginia? What is our best course?
Well, I don't. I'm not a political person anymore, but in my younger days, I worked with actually Congressman Bill Wampler Sr. there out of the 9th District at the time in your area, as well as in the congressional district just north, the 6th District, and throughout Virginia, and worked for as an intern for Governor Holton and others, and just approaching state officials. Any person who approaches a state official, particularly in the legislature, in the House and the Senate, and just says, look, this isn't going to work. I've got real concerns about this. You can find lots of things online, particularly at a group called StopPredatoryGambling.org. That's StopPredatoryGambling.org. They testified last September at a congressional hearing on this, as well as they testify repeatedly in their bipartisan, charitable group that's educating the public on these issues. And they can provide information and background information on these things. Anything that anybody finds written by myself, Professor John Kindt, you may recopy it, republish it, send it around on Facebook, social networks. Don't worry about copyright. If you go to the University of Illinois digital website, it's called IDEALS, that's IDEALS, .illinois.edu. Look up Professor Kindt and others. Kindt, K-I-N-D-T, like in kindergarten, John Kindt. And you can download my congressional testimonies, state testimonies, studies, and if you go to these different sites, quite a few of those are law review articles. We're warning the legislature in Illinois and elsewhere that these things are going to happen, and sure enough, they happened. People should not underestimate the power of just talking to their state legislatures. I remember one governor telling me, not a governor of Virginia, that his office received 17 letters, just 17 letters from around the state on a $1 billion proposal, and he killed the proposal. So just a few letters, just a few people taking action can really have an enormous impact. Because legislators know that for every letter they receive, there are hundreds or even thousands of other people who feel in the same way. So don't underestimate the impact that you can have with letting your opinions be known one way or another on either side of the issue.
Let me ask you this. You made this comment, something to this effect, that these casinos, they get their business, say, for $25,000. Now, is that buying license, or what is that $25,000?
Well, that was an example from Illinois, and the Wall Street value of a casino license, just on Wall Street, the state could charge $500 million to $1 billion, probably $1 billion, the value of just the permission, the license to open up a casino anywhere in the United States. But in Illinois, the legislature got together their buddies, their political insiders, and they said, well, we're going to only charge you $25,000 a piece for these 10 casino licenses. So the state of Illinois only brought in $250,000, $25,000 each for these 10 casino licenses, which they could have sold for $5 billion at the time, which is about $12 billion in today's money. So that's a classic example of the state treasury and the legislature giving away money to the gambling interests. I'll give you another example. In the state of Illinois, which now has more slot machines than any other state in the country, the tax rate, according to the legislature, on a slot machine in your locale is 5% to the local government, 25% to the state. 70% of the money goes to the owner-operators. 70%.
And
you mentioned Canada. In Canada, it's 90-some percent.
and you said the average slot machine brings in $100,000 a year?
That is a minimum. If you're bringing in less than $100,000 a year, you get laughed out of the gambling conferences. So that's really sort of the minimum that you should be bringing in on each slot machine per year. And of course, some slot machines, we have people who've installed 5 slot machines, and within 6 months they're millionaires.
Let me ask you a question, John, with regards to slot machines. Do we really know how they work in terms, and is there regulation and that sort of thing to make sure that they pay off so much? How is that controlled?
Well, the gambling interest will set up a regulatory commission saying we are regulating and controlling this and ensuring the honesty. Well, I'm sorry, what is the honesty? Well, the honesty is that they get their money and you lose.
Yeah.
You know, they set the rules. And so, I mean, you look at Las Vegas, you got billions and billions of dollars. That's not made on winners. That's made on people losing billions and billions of dollars. And so the regulatory commissions are, even if they're operating in good faith, are usually underfunded and overwhelmed. So the regulations, as a matter of fact, there was a huge article by ProPublica that was just published in Illinois, and it's like 20 pages long. I mean, this is an investigative report talking about all the corruption and the problems in Illinois, and that's just part one. And you can find it online. It's by ProPublica. That's P-R-O Publica, as in public, with an A on the end of it. Publica, ProPublica, and it shows how states have been manipulated, particularly on slot machines, and the people have been left, taxpayers have been left holding the bag. You know, Virginia's been such a stalwart, including its congressional delegation, in stopping gambling and keeping it out of Virginia. I used to point to Virginia and say, hey, Illinois, hey, Indiana, hey, other states, look at Virginia. They've got a much better budget than you've got. Even back during the Great Recession, Virginia had a much better fiscal situation than any of these gambling states. And now Virginia's going the opposite direction. It's really sad and distressing, particularly since there's more and more backlash in the gambling states against the gambling. So as I quoted in one of my statements before a congressional committee, I said, George Santayana, paraphrasing, those who forget the economic lessons of history are condemned to relive them. Well, that's what Virginia's going to do if they don't do their homework on this. They're going to go in the wrong direction.
So you're saying that there are a lot of states out there that are trying to get out of this, and Virginia is trying to jump in.
Yes. The public done polls in Illinois. I hate to keep coming back to Illinois, but it's a great example, and other states are similar, where 2/3 of the public are against expanded gambling, and or against various gambling initiatives. 2/3. I mean, we had lots of polls. There were so many, they stopped taking the polls. And because they know how the public feels. The public is against all of this. The legislature is in the bag, and they're going with their friends in the gambling industry. And literally, it's really poor public policy that every solution you have revolves around gambling. How about talking about some of the social issues, talking about tax policy, talking about the hard issues, instead of selling out to the gambling lobby for a quick buck, which is going to result in long-term pain for the public and for the government. So there is a short-term gain. You will see some bucks coming in initially, but if you go to this ProPublica article and others, what they promise never really quite materializes. They'll promise to build hotels, they'll promise to build theme parks. 99% of the time, that has not happened. It's all about casinos. And as one of our former governors in Illinois said, you can't gamble your way to prosperity. People need to get past this. You can't gamble your way to prosperity.
John, if I walked into a casino, what percentage of slot machines would you say that I would see? 90, 95%?
Well, generally, in most casinos, slot machines are 90% of the money that's coming in. They don't care about the card games. You got to actually pay somebody to deal the 21, to deal the blackjack, to do the roulette tables. And they'd rather get the money off of these machines. You just dust them off and collect the money. So 90% of the real bucks in most casinos is coming in from the slot machines. In some of the tribal casinos, you go down to North Carolina, it's just 100% slot machines. They don't even have the card games. So the trend is toward that, and the trend is also toward, the business model is toward putting gambling 24/7 on cell phones and video games. Well, even the casinos, some of the casinos don't want that because they realize then people are going to migrate to that and away from the slot machines. So, yeah, the faster the gambling, the more accessible it is. It's called the accessibility factor. The more accessible the gambling is, the more likely people are to gamble on it.
That's kind of interesting that you talk about 90% of the casino typically would be the slot machines. It's kind of interesting because one of the things they're selling points is they're trying to convince us they're only going to be they're trying to use the old Bristol Mall, and they say it's only going to take up 10% of the mall. Well, slot machines don't take up a whole lot of room, so you can still have a lot of slot machines in there. But not only that, the amazing thing is the other sales point is lots of jobs, lots of jobs. A slot machine just requires somebody to come, like you say, dust it off and collect the money, and maybe a technician to tune it up occasionally. It's not a whole lot of jobs generated by slot machines.
Well, that's an excellent point. And as I think the point I made earlier, all the money that goes into that slot machine is a lost job out of the consumer economy.
Right.
So if you have 1,000 slot machines or 2,000 slot machines, you're going to be losing 2,000 jobs per year, every year, out of the consumer economy within the feeder markets around the casinos. So it's going to be a drain on the economy. And very frankly, given the population base in the area, I think after a few years you're going to see the casino in serious financial trouble.
Okay, John, to sum it up, what warning would you give to the Bristol, Virginia people of what a casino is going to do if they allow it to come to Bristol?
Well, you're going to lose one job per year for every slot machine that they say they're going to have. Plus, the basics are the ABCs. New addicted gamblers, which will double, just like drug addiction, crack cocaine and creating new addicted gamblers. Go to 60 Minutes, slot machines are the big gamble. B, new bankruptcies up 18 to 42% as people lose their money. And C, new crime of 10% per year every year as people lose their money and resort to crime. So taxpayers are going to be paying for all of this. Society is going to be paying for all of this. The gambling interests don't care. All they want is the money going into the slot machines.
Okay, John, we appreciate you being with us, and thank you for calling. You've been a great help, okay?
Well, thank you. Thanks for what you're doing to inform and educate the public.
Okay, thank you, John. Bye. Okay, fellas, we have a couple of 3 minutes.
Well,
jump
you
in.
know, you guys was talking about all of the things that this is going to do and the destructiveness of it. And I was sitting here listening, and I was thinking to myself, why would anybody want it? And the answer is found in Isaiah 5. They put light for darkness and darkness for light. They don't want you to know the facts. It's like he said a moment ago, that don't confuse people with the facts. But sin has a way of drawing people to it.
That's right.
And short-circuiting the brain. If people will use your good senses that God has given you, it will be absolutely amazing at the good choices you can make. And when you look at the evidence, not at somebody that's trying to sell you a con job, but you look at the evidence. We see this in religion all the time. There's so many fake religions out here that it's unbelievable. When you ask, why would anybody want to be a member of a fake religion? Well, the reason being that sin short-circuits the brain.
Oh, yeah.
And the first thing you know, you're involved in things that you can't read about in the Bible.
That's right.
And Satan is trying to deter anybody from getting in the Bible anyhow. And so the casino thing, it obviously, is a thing that if you go by the facts, you won't have any problem with.
And if they bring the casino to Bristol, let's say they do, and if I went over to interview the clientele there, nearly 95% of them would say they believe in God, they believe in Christ, and they expect to be saved. And many religions allow that.
Right.
Once saved, always saved, elected from the foundation of the world, predestination, ungodly doctrines which promote sin.
You know, Wesley, I was in a meeting maybe 2 months ago, and there were various preachers there that met with the promoters of the casino, and there was at least one preacher there that spoke up and said he was for it. He thought this would be great for the community. And, you know, what's really amazing is when you stop and you think about the great damage that it's going to do to individuals, the great damage it's going to do to families, the great damage it's going to do to the greater community, how in the world could anyone that has any respect for Scripture think it's all right to do such harm to people? You know, the simplest argument that I know of is Matthew 7 and verse 12. Do to others whatever you would have them do to you. I don't want someone doing things that are going to undermine my family,
Sure.
undermine my ability to meet my obligations. Yet there's many people out there, religious folks, that don't have the nerve to at least call their congressman, or excuse me, their senator or their state delegate, and say, we don't want this.
That's exactly right, Bill. Are you gambling on your soul? Don't gamble on your soul. Don't be a member of a man-made church, obeying a man-made plan of salvation like praying the sinner's prayer, faith only. Do it the Bible way. Hear the Word of God. Put your faith in Jesus Christ. Repent of what Jesus says is wrong. Confess Jesus Christ before men. Be baptized into the death of Jesus Christ, where you crucify the old man of sin to rise to walk in newness of life. The Bible even tells you where you get that new life. He'll add you to his church, not a man-made church. You love him, put him first. When the roll's called up yonder, you'll be there. Don't gamble with your soul. You got one shot at it. Thank you for being with us, and may God richly bless you as you continue to study the greatest of all books, the inspired, inerrant, perfect will of God. All right, Billy, how did you think it went?
I thought it was good. I think there was something wrong with his phone. Man,